Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our new episode in the museum's Stay Connected Facebook Live series. I'm historian Edna Friedberg. Our museum remains closed in order to keep everyone safe and healthy, but we remain committed to giving you opportunities to learn about the history of the Holocaust and its continued relevance today. If you run into any difficulties while streaming today's show, first, please try refreshing your browser. If that doesn't do the trick, rest assured that immediately following the program, the show will be available to watch in its entirety. So please come back, watch it on demand, and share it with your friends. As we bring you today's program, we are acutely aware that many of you are thinking about the continued unrest and soul searching in the wake of the horrific killing of George Floyd. There has been a significant spike in the number of people turning to a famous quote on our website from German pastor Martin Niemöller. As our current moment draws us once again to Pastor Niemöller's words, let's examine their origins and the man who first spoke them. I am joined today by our guest, my colleague and friend, Dr. Suzanne Brown-Fleming. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, Edna. How are you?
Nice to see you. I'm doing fine. And you?
Just fine.
Suzanne is director of the museum's international academic programs and is an expert on Christianity during the Holocaust. During the course of today's show, please post your questions for Suzanne in the comments section, and we'll get to as many of them live as we are able to in the time that we have. So to begin, for those watching who have not visited our museum in Washington, D.C., since our museum opened 27 years ago, the final wall of our permanent exhibition features powerful words credited to Pastor Martin Niemöller. What does it say, and what's it about, Suzanne?
So I want to set the stage for us a little bit first by saying how surprised visitors are when they enter our museum and our website and go through it to see that the Nazi state went from a liberal democracy to an autocracy and a totalitarian state very fast. And our visitors are also very surprised to learn how the German population itself, to the extent they could, did not resist and oftentimes agreed with the changes in society and politics around them. So in that context, when we look at this quote, we're thinking about a regime that targeted Jews, targeted millions of others. Most German citizens either let that happen, stood by and let that happen, or agreed. And in that context, I think we really see in the quote itself that lack of empathy is a key piece of why the Holocaust happened. Let's pull this quote up. First, they came for the socialists, but I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
So it's really about silence, and when you don't speak out on behalf of others because it seems like it's not your problem,
Right.
Where does that leave you?
Right.
Suzanne, we've had a couple of really powerful comments already come in from viewers. Dottie from Oregon reached out to send us a photo of this quote on our wall, as we've just seen, which she has been carrying in her wallet for 40 years.
Wow.
And a viewer named Jody shared that the whole quote on the museum wall brought her to tears, and she has never forgotten it. So thank you, Dottie. Thank you, Jody, for sharing that perspective and the power and resonance of these words shared by so many millions of people around the world. Not only do people find great meaning in this, but they also adopt and adapt these words. And it's considered a poem by some, the structure of it, in current day protests. Let's take a look at a couple. Let's look at a sign that appeared at a July 2018 march here in the United States in response to American immigration policy, where a protester is saying, first they came for the Muslims, then they came for the Latinos, and then they came for us. Stop the hate. So this woman knows that people will recognize the structure, know what she's invoking, and she is using it in the service of a cause in which she believes strongly. A second example from a different part of the political spectrum is a meme that has been circulated on social media showing different flags. First, they came for this flag, then they came for this flag, and especially for viewers outside of the United States who may not recognize these flags, the person who created this meme is invoking very strong moments in American history, the American Revolution, the American Civil War, and depicting assaults on civil liberties, on personal liberties and personal freedoms using this quote. So it has appeal and resonance all across the political spectrum. What is it about this that makes people still invoke this quote 75 years later, Suzanne?
It's really a timeless message. It goes across time and space. I think that we've seen people across political spectrums, ethnic groups, religious groups, all parts of society can really resonate with this. It's a universalist message, and it's a message about empathy. I think we all can see that.
And Niemöller himself was a man of extremes over the course of his life, as we will soon learn. People often hold up Niemöller as a model of opposition to Nazism, but may be surprised to know that in fact he began as a supporter, an early supporter of the Nazi Party. What was his path?
So Niemöller is one of the most fascinating people I've ever read about. He was born in a small town in Germany in 1892 to a conservative Prussian family. His father was a Lutheran pastor. He himself was really steeped in nationalism, monarchy, the typical anti-Semitism of his church, and a real love for his country, to the point where his dream was to be a naval officer. And as soon as he was 18 years old, he went to the German Navy and served in the German Navy as an officer during World War I. His views on Jews, unsurprisingly, were typical of that time, where Jews were seen as the killers of Jesus of Nazareth and as racially separate from the rest of Germany and as something alien and harmful in German society. And these were his views too, which shouldn't surprise us that much given the environment in which he was raised.
I want to acknowledge that we have viewers watching from all around the country and all around the world. People internationally are watching from the United Kingdom. Good morning to our colleagues at the Montreal Holocaust Museum. And here in the United States, we have people watching from Seattle, Lancaster, Ohio, Raleigh, Boynton Beach, Florida. Good morning to you in Nebraska, in Pennsylvania, Indiana, Columbus, Ohio, in El Paso, Texas, San Diego, Chicago, my home state of Illinois, Hanover, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Michigan, Boston, Atlanta, the Hudson Valley, Charleston, West Virginia, San Francisco, Norfolk, Virginia, and Glendale, Arizona, and additionally from around the world, from Brazil, Chile, and Mexico.
Wow.
So those were Martin Niemöller's personal views, very classically German nationalist, Christian. How did he express his views through voting?
He voted for the Nazis in 1924, in 1928, in 1933. He read Mein Kampf. The Nazi message resonated with him. It's really important to know that about him. It resonated with Niemöller through the 1920s and all the way until 1933. And for someone who was raised like Niemöller in a conservative Prussian background, we shouldn't be surprised that a democratic republic like Weimar was alien to him, was unfamiliar to him, and he was looking for strong leadership and the kind of unity that he believed Germany had under the Kaiser. And he wanted also somebody a leader who was going to take away the effects of the Great Depression in Germany, who was going to bring German pride back after the punitive Treaty of Versailles following World War I. And the racial message resonated with him too, frankly.
I think it's really key to note that Niemöller was not unique in this respect. We know that there were so many Germans who, even if, let's say, the racial message did not resonate with them. Many positive things, many positive plans and hopes and aspirations for the restoration of Germany felt very appealing to them. But he really, if he's voting for the Nazis in 1924, they're still a radical fringe party at that time. He is an early adherent. So what caused him eventually to break with the Nazi Party? What drove him away?
Well, to understand Niemöller, there are really a couple of things that pop out in my mind. There's a story about him when he was a little boy that I actually think tells us a lot. That when he was about 8, he was in a doctor's office he had fallen and hurt his nose, and he had a beetle in his shirt, like little boys sometimes do. The beetle was flying around the doctor's office, and he was screaming, "Don't touch my beetle, leave me my beetle." And the doctor said, "Well, I see that you haven't hurt your mouth." He was a really opinionated guy. He loved God, he loved his country, and he believed that Adolf Hitler would be the person who could bring those two things together. Now, in 1933, Adolf Hitler had promised to leave the churches alone and to support Christianity in Germany. And that was why in March 1933, Niemöller not only felt comfortable voting for him, but supported him. What happened in reality was that the Nazi regime did not support the churches, immediately began interfering in church life, including in Protestant church life. And this Niemöller was not okay with. His resistance to Nazism was based on its interference in Protestant life. He didn't like that. He didn't accept that. There was a Nazi branch, a faction that wanted to recreate a unified Protestant church with a blonde Aryan Jesus, to get rid of the Old Testament, to expel any families who'd converted to Christianity from Judaism. And this Niemöller was not okay with. He felt the state had its purview and religion and the church had its purview, and he did not agree with that line being blurred.
So when he objected to the Nazi Party, it wasn't because he thought what they were doing was generally wrong. It was about and only about the church.
That's right.
Now, he in fact had a personal relationship with Hitler, did he not?
He became something of a nemesis for Hitler quite early. He was a very outspoken person. And by 1934, when Niemöller saw that Protestant life was going to be interfered with, he and several other pastors started their own movement within the Protestant church, eventually called the Confessing Church movement. And he was vocal about it. His sermons had thousands of people come in this very wealthy suburb of Berlin. Hitler and Goebbels started hearing about him as early as 1934. Now, Niemöller and several other Protestant pastors met with Hitler in January of 1934 to try to gain concessions. Niemöller walked into that meeting thinking, of course, my Führer is going to agree with me. And much to Niemöller's shock, he found out that Niemöller, had been recorded by the Gestapo and was considered by the Nazi state as a rogue agent, if you will. And Adolf Hitler followed Niemöller's sermons and preaching quite avidly. Adolf Hitler didn't like that Niemöller would not agree to a unified, Nazified Protestant church. And they became something of arch enemies quite early on.
So he was not just some pastor on the sidelines. He was a prominent figure and one who directly antagonized the top brass of the Nazi hierarchy.
Absolutely. And the Niemöller sermons were read, especially in the United States. They were really, he became an international figure as early as 1934, 1935. American Protestants really admired him. Niemöller was arrested multiple times between 1934 and 1937 for his sermons, accused of being an agitator against the state. And then finally was arrested for the final time in 1937. And even after the Ministry of Justice dismissed the charges of treason against him, Adolf Hitler was so personally angry that Hitler had him sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp as Hitler's own personal prisoner, as my colleague Matt Hokenos likes to say.
So I think it's significant to note you talked about people in the United States being aware of him. And in fact, we have a Time magazine cover from 1940. Let's have a look at that shows his prominence. What are we looking at here? Can you unpack this for us, Suzanne?
Sure. This is a Time magazine cover from December 1940. At this time, Niemöller had already been incarcerated in the concentration camp Sachsenhausen near Berlin since 1938. And the inscription reads something to the essence of "Only the church still stands up against the swastika." Now, this absolutely infuriated Hitler, but for Niemöller, he became even more of a popular figure, that he had fans, if you will, all over the world, praying for him, sending him letters in Sachsenhausen and subsequently in Dachau, and his message was really admired and watched all over the world, and Hitler knew this.
Again, would like to invite viewers to please submit your questions for Suzanne so we can answer them. We have more international viewers joining us today from Hong Kong, from Colombia, Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Munich in Germany. So thank you. So Niemöller is now a prisoner, a concentration camp prisoner, a well-known one. And I do think it's very interesting to note that if people are sending him letters, it just is another piece of evidence that not only were people aware of concentration camps, but they in some cases even knew specifically who is imprisoned and in which camp. Mm-hmm. I think it's remarkable, though, that during and he spends 8 years in camps, he remains a committed patriot. Could you explain that? Give us some examples of that, please.
Yes, and not only does he remain a committed patriot, he actually remains what we think of today as an anti-Semite. He tried to enlist in the German Navy as a reserve officer when the Nazis invaded Poland in September 9. His attempt
from a camp. Sorry, just to be clear, he's a prisoner in a camp and he wants to enlist.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Go on.
And he's politely declined on that front. And sermons like those that Niemöller had delivered in 1935 about the nature of Judaism being something poisonous and negative, these opinions also did not change while he was in concentration camps. In fact, after the war, Niemöller had quite a few fights with the American military government, feeling that American policy in occupied Germany was driven by vengeful Jews in the American military. And we're looking here at a sermon that Niemöller delivered in 1935 to thousands of people in his church in Berlin-Dahlem. A highly gifted Jews are a highly gifted people, which produces idea after idea for the benefit of the world, but whatever it takes changes into poison, and Judaism ever reaps contempt and hatred.
So we're seeing that even as he began to turn, and eventually very vocally and with big consequences against the Nazi Party, his views about Jews, for example, did not change. What eventually sparked his evolution toward more universalist beliefs for which he is now famous today?
So in 1941, he was moved from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp to the Dachau concentration camp. And he was in a special prisoner block with several prominent Catholics, actually. And he could see the torture block from where he was. And he also had access in Dachau to other prisoners. So he really he had been in isolation in Sachsenhausen, in solitary confinement. So he began to see with his own eyes some of what was going on around him, even though he was still a privileged prisoner at Dachau. And after the war, a story that my colleague Matt Hokenos opens his wonderful book with is just a month or two after the end of the war in the winter of 1945, Niemöller and his wife Elsa, the mother of his 7 children, visited Dachau because he wanted to show Elsa his cell. And there was on a tree affixed a very crude wooden sign made by other former prisoners, saying, painted in black and white, here more than 200,000 people were cremated between 1933 and 1945. And at that moment, he really he felt personally devastated, and he turned to Elsa and said, I have an alibi from 1937 to 1945. He was incarcerated, but where was I from 1933 to 1937? So he started to have this personal awakening, and then it began to appear in his public speaking as well. This is a quote, really important quote that's shows us seeds the beginning of what we now know as the Niemöller poem. In October of 1945, several Protestant leaders were meeting with Allied officials and talking about the relationship of the Protestant churches to Nazism. And Niemöller really pushed, and this is in Stuttgart, Germany. He gave a speech, a really tough speech, and he said, we're guilty of having been silent when we should have spoken, in this October 1945 Stuttgart speech. That was a really unusual view at the time among Germans, very unusual, lonely view at the time. And he took that statement that he'd made in Stuttgart and slowly began building on it. And it becomes eventually what we know as this quote today.
So that was both a bold statement, but also from someone perhaps unexpected, given his personal history.
Or one could say entirely expected. It's interesting. Depends on the way you look at it.
Say what you mean. Tell us more about that.
Well, he was a there are many ways to look at him. He was a courageous, very courageous man who loved his country, who loved his family, who loved God, and he mistook initially the Nazi regime for something it wasn't, and it took him 12 years of the Nazi regime to understand what was happening to so-called non-Aryans, Jews, enemies of the state. Also, Germans were really pushed after the war in those immediate months to see what Nazism had wrought. So Niemöller, too, hadn't necessarily seen the pictures of atrocities in concentration camps and on the Eastern Front, but newspapers from June 1945 onward, this was in the face of every German. And being a person of conscience, which he always was, even when he held beliefs that you and I might not agree with, he is always a person of conscience. He couldn't look at those pictures and read what he was reading and not be moved. But it was a slow journey for him. It was a slow journey. I had mentioned before, through the 1940s and 50s, he still held on to some of his anti-Semitic views. But then over time, slowly in the 1950s, he started to let go of his militarism. He actually became a pacifist by the end of his life, an active pacifist. He began to let go of his anti-Semitism. He made a really important speech in 1960 in New York. He began to let go of his belief in Germany first and became an internationalist. And he began to understand that racial ideology and science and prejudice was really damaging, and had a relationship with Martin Luther King by the end of his life.
He even pushed, if I'm remembering correctly, for Martin Luther King to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, yes.
And went to Vietnam, right, to meet with Ho Chi Minh.
Yes, he met with Ho Chi Minh I believe in 1967. He and his words, it's fascinating the way they have been used. They really became popular in the 1970s and 1980s, I would say. I don't know how many viewers out there remember the Dear Abby column. I used to read it when I was younger. Dear Abby published a version of this Niemöller confession or poem in the late 1970s, and that's when it really entered American living rooms and began to be picked up. Now, Niemöller himself had been using some version of this phrase over many years anti-nuclear marches, other peace demonstrations, discussions about German guilt, and it sort of became more and more mythical and came together over time.
People sometimes ask if we have misquoted it in the museum because they have seen other versions that mention communists or Jehovah's Witnesses. Was there one version? Is this something that he published, or was it verbal?
There was never one version. It began in Stuttgart in October 1945 when he made that statement about German guilt and responsibility and his own feelings of responsibility. And in 1946, he did a major tour of Germany trying to expand on this thesis of German guilt and his own personal guilt. And depending on his audience, he would be more specific. He might, with some audience, he would specifically mention communists. With others, he would specifically mention Jews or Jehovah's Witnesses or those who were disabled. And in 1947, he had a big American tour, and there we see a further morphing. He himself does not recollect ever writing this poem in the form we see it now, or this confession. And it's just something that became something that belongs to everyone, and there are multiple versions.
So it sounds like his views and his reflections on personal responsibility and collective responsibility, it evolved and morphed as he did.
Yes. Yes.
Suzanne, we have a question from a viewer named Angela watching in Fair Oaks, California. She writes, "What I would like to learn more about is how to combat anti-Semitism and denial of the Holocaust. How can we support all people who experience racism, discrimination, injustice? And how do we engage in meaningful and respectful conversations with those folks in our lives who have differing opinions?"
It's a wonderful question, and it's really a perfect question for Niemöller himself. Niemöller was somebody who believed in dialogue. He believed in dialogue with people who violently agreed with him and violently disagreed with him, and was not afraid to put his beliefs out there and himself out there on the line when he needed to. Now, he was a good listener as well. He would give huge sermons in Berlin with thousands of people, and he had people who loved him and people who hated him, and everything in between. And he talked to them all. And I think that that's a lesson we can take from him. And he could change. This is despite the specific circumstances in which he grew up and the beliefs that were natural for him, given the way he grew up. He was able to go out into the world and talk to people and actually see that he was wrong and change. And I think that's a good lesson too, to realize human beings can change, other people can change, we can change.
Absolutely. I would like to acknowledge our colleagues, fellow Holocaust educators who are watching, as I mentioned earlier, from the Montreal Holocaust Museum, also the Holocaust Resource Center of Buffalo, and one of our museum colleagues, because we don't see each other in person these days anymore because of social distancing, Rebecca Dupaz, one of our educators, who writes that Niemöller can't be described in a singular way. His life is much too complex.
She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. It's
Suzanne, I have one final question for you. Given that people may be surprised or find it interesting that the sentiment so often invoked came from someone who initially supported the Nazi movement, how has the fame and popularity of Niemöller's words come to muddle or change the way that he is now remembered?
Well, I think as human beings, we love to create heroes and we love to create villains, and he was neither. He was a person who, of deep conscience, of deep faith, who considered everything he said and everything he did, and was willing to acknowledge when he was wrong and willing to change. I think that that's, it's not necessary to say that he was a hero or a villain. It's actually more interesting, more fascinating, and more important to see him as somebody who held beliefs we today know are wrong, who at the time, it was clear, it resulted in murder and of 6 million people and millions of others. To me, he's somebody who, in that way, he represents hope, because all of us can look at him and see that we're all imperfect, and yet we can all do something. We have a voice and we can change.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for teaching us today, for giving us a sense of the complexities. There's always complexity and nuance behind anything that seems too straightforward or too all good. So we're really grateful for you sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, before we close our program, I want to acknowledge a very solemn anniversary for us here at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And a viewer named Sarah Ellen has written to say thank you so much to the Holocaust Museum for not staying silent on the issue of indifference. Sarah Ellen, we don't really feel that we have a choice, and know that what we talk about is not only a matter of history, but that has enduring resonance and echoes today. 11 years ago today, we lost a beloved and valued member of our museum family, Officer Stephen Tyrone Johns. Officer Johns was part of our protection services, our security team, and he was killed on our doorstep while protecting museum visitors and staff. He was killed by an avowed racist and anti-Semite who had come with a gun to our museum. We honor Officer Johns' memory every year, and we did so again this past Saturday when we welcomed new members of the museum's Summer Youth Leadership Program, which bears Officer Johns' name. The students took the following pledge. The legacy of Officer Johns occupies a permanent place in our hearts. His courage inspires us to strive toward a future without hatred and bigotry. In his honor, we, the Stephen Tyrone Johns Summer Youth Leadership Ambassadors, pledge to embrace the ideals Officer Johns sacrificed his life to protect. We are committed to actively engage in our communities, to reach out to others, to promote human dignity, and to confront hatred and bigotry wherever we are in the world and for as long as we live. Together we stand, hand in hand. In the name of Stephen Tyrone Johns, we are a community in action. And that was a very, very painful day at the museum, and Officer Johns and his family made sacrifices that no one should ever have to endure. And it is our honor and privilege to remember him and work in service of combating the forces that killed him, to do that work every day. We are actually, in that spirit, working extra hard this week, and we invite you to join us for another Facebook Live program this Friday, June 12th, not our typical day, but it will be in honor of what would have been Anne Frank's 91st birthday. This Friday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, our guest will be Holocaust survivor and museum volunteer Alfred Munzer, who will share his personal experience as a hidden child in the Netherlands during the Holocaust and understand how the bravery and commitment of people who hid Jewish children during the war saved countless lives. So we hope you will join us then. Until then, wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for joining us, and be well and be safe. Goodbye.